I make it my goal, amongst many goals, to be proud of who I am and to never forget the sacrifices my community has made in order for me and countless others to be where we are now. Well, hello there, and welcome to the podcast, to the first episode of Season 2 of Queerly Overthinking. Oh my goodness gracious, y'all. I cannot believe we are here on Season 2. This is absolutely wild, and I have a lot of great things in store for us this season. We are going to be diving a little bit deeper into queer culture, and specifically, I want to share how I navigate my personal sexual identity, learning to deconstruct indoctrinated homophobia, and reflecting on how it feels living in a post-AIDS epidemic and lavender scare generation. Right out of the gate on the first episode, am I right? Well, let's get into it. It's been a hot minute since the last episode aired. How are you? How have you been? How's your 2024 shaping up so far? Honey, let me tell you, I have been booked and busy both with work, side projects, and traveling. But I could not be more excited to be here with you right now, making space to talk about whatever we want to talk about. As I mentioned in the intro, we're going to be hitting the ground running, discussing a number of things in this episode. The first of which is learning how to navigate one's own sexual identity in different spaces and expanding on the feeling of personal freedom to express yourself in those spaces. I've created a list of questions to run through. While I'll be answering those here, I would love to know what your thoughts are, either in the comment section or on the social channels. Or if you write a review after listening to this episode, I would love to know what you think and what your answers are to these questions. Jumping right into it, the first question says, in what situations do I feel the need to mask or code switch my sexuality? One thing to mention, if you're not too familiar with the term code switch, my amazing friend and producer, Cass, introduced me to that term, which one definition found online says to alternate between two or more languages or varieties of language in conversation. From what I've also been told and found online, it's not limited to language, but it could be behaviors, appearances, etc. Anything where you find yourself adapting to the environment that you're in. Off the bat, this is a great question, and I feel very fortunate to say that there aren't a whole lot of environments that I can think of where I feel like I have to mask or code switch, which I feel incredibly grateful for, and to be able to say that. I certainly try my best to be authentic to who I am without feeling the need to cover up any part of my life or feel like I can't be myself in any given situation. However, and this is a big however, that is not always the case as much as I would like it to be 100% of the time. And if I'm being honest with myself, I don't know if it'll ever be 100% of the time. I'll likely get into it maybe a little bit later in this season, but the times when I have to mask or code switch are often times with my blood-related family. And it feels really crappy sometimes to feel like there are people in my life who I care about or who had a close relationship with at some point in my life, and now I keep things surface level, which I hate doing. I hate not being able to be myself around people or feel like I have to cover up either my own well-being or my life, or the fact that, mentioned in earlier episodes, vulnerability can also mean allowing people to see multiple aspects of your life. And thankfully, though, I feel so fortunate, as I mentioned last season in the first intro episodes, that I have a handful of family members that are amazing. I consider them to be like my chosen family and friends around me as well, like the community that I've cultivated where I can feel like I can be myself and not actively cover up anything or any semblance of who I am to feel like I need to protect myself or have some level of acceptance. And I genuinely feel very lucky to have that. The second part of that question is, how do you balance expressing your true self with feeling safe and comfortable in different environments? And is this a conscious choice or an unconscious choice? Dang, y'all, okay. I really had to think about that one for a hot minute. Ooh, it's a little bit of both, if I'm being honest. Starting with the conscious or unconscious part of it, I sometimes find myself without any intention starting to put up a wall if I don't know someone very well or I'm familiar with their views and how they feel towards queer people. I am an extroverted introvert, someone who loves to sit and listen to a group of people talking while sipping my drink, observing, and just kind of like gauging the vibe of the room and how comfortable I feel with being vulnerable and allowing my personality to come through. My personality, I personally think, is rather positive and bubbly most of the time. I choose to focus a lot on the joy and goodness in the world. Goodness gracious, we need more of that every day. But I'm very cautious about letting myself express myself or get, a little, I don't know, just silly sometimes when I'm first getting to know someone or perhaps like in professional settings. While I do allow my personality to shine through in areas of my work, I also take my craft very seriously. For example, I'm not afraid to discuss being gay or being a part of the LGBT community with anyone I work with or collaborate with, but I also feel like there's a time and a place for that, as there is with anything. Another example is like I love to display a little rainbow flag on my desk, and I don't know. I feel like I've noticed that I've leaned more into being comfortable showing up as who I am and leaning into the idea of like, yes, I'm gay and that's a part of me and a large part of my personality. And I'm also here to create some amazing content and work and, change the world one design at a time. You know what I mean? The third part of this first set of questions is, what does feeling free mean to me in terms of sexuality? And is it self-acceptance, open expression, freedom from judgment, or something else? In my opinion, as a cis gay white man, the feeling of being free feels like I can walk down the street wearing the biggest rainbow shirt and not feel like I'm about to get hurt. I feel freer when I visit LGBT-friendly cities such as San Francisco, for example. When I visited last year, I felt like I was walking down the street and everyone was gay. It was the weirdest feeling. I felt like I was in camouflage. It's a weird dichotomy. I don't know if I'm using that word right. A weird comparison in a way. I don't know. Just like it was a weird feeling being in Texas, albeit in, the Dallas area, which is a bluish, purplish pool in a sea of red, to then visit an area so queer friendly. It was just the contrast was very real. Notice I was careful to pick my words when I said a cis gay white man. The first thing people see when they see me is a white man. And in my opinion, that comes with its own list of privileges in this country. And though it doesn't take someone long to clock me as gay, as I often wear short shorts or a rainbow wristband, or if they talk to me and they hear my voice or my verbiage or just how I interact with others and how I am that kind of like bright, bubbly personality, that doesn't take long to figure out that I'm gay. I would say the biggest obstacle I see ahead of me right now in feeling more free is the fear and uncertainty of unknown acceptance or rejection, not knowing how someone will react or engage with me. But at the end of the day, and especially within the last few months or so, I've really leaned into this quote, yes and mentality, as Ariana Grande puts it. It's a statement, and it's a bold statement, depending on where you live. And I recognize that. It's nerve-wracking sometimes, but I feel so incredibly fortunate to be in the position that I am and to feel like with each passing day, I can embrace and express myself both inwardly and outwardly. This next segment I want to talk about is deconstructing internalized homophobia and redefining masculinity. I know that's a lot to unpack in just a few words, but I'm ready to kind of just open this up a little bit more for, not only myself, but anybody else who may be thinking about it. Taking a minute to reflect on that question. Have I identified any internalized homophobia within myself? That's something that I've been having to ask myself recently, and has this manifested in different ways through just thoughts or actions? For me, when I think about internalized homophobia, I think about how I was raised in a very rigid environment, both in religion and politics, and how the views expressed to me as a kid became ingrained in my ways of thinking as an adult. And it's taken a lot of time and discernment to identify and remove a lot of it. Thinking back, I did, go with the flow a lot with whatever topic came up at the dinner table or things that were brought up in a sentiment of fear and distrust. And specifically around, the gay agenda or things surrounding being homosexual or just gay in general. With the understanding that I have now, it's a lot of misunderstanding I was surrounded with. I mentioned in an episode last season titled Growing Up Mormon, where I talked a little bit about what it was like attending a Mormon university in Idaho. And it was really hard the last year of my studies, as that was when I was beginning to grapple with my sexuality and my faith and trying to reconcile the two. I lightly touched on it in that episode, but I want to lean into that a little bit more and say that while I had some positive experiences there and with some amazing people who I still keep in touch with to this day, the coming out part, the realizing who I was part, there was so much internalized homophobia I was dealing with. Even thinking about it now, I don't know how I made it through that time, if I'm being honest. It's not a time I like to think about very often. I felt so ashamed of who I was. I felt so alone. I was literally praying the gay away each night. And I was hoping that if I expressed enough faith, that I would be fixed, quote unquote. I remember talking to an on-campus therapist at some point, trying to figure out how or why this was happening to me and what I could do, but it didn't go anywhere, obviously. It is so wild to me to think back on those years and, reflect on that time with the knowledge I have now. Keeping everything I just shared in mind about those kind of bits of internalized homophobia, of praying the gay away, of not feeling maybe good enough, how do I define masculinity as a gay man? We're kind of like shifting gears here, kind of adding on to this question. And are there any specific stereotypes or expectations that I've had to challenge myself? I've always been a little bit flamboyant, so to speak. I often can be very soft-spoken as well in public. And there are also times when I really do lean into like my, yes, queen, you better work, But how does that relate to masculinity? Well, I can't remember a time when I wasn't told to, say, for example, speak up or act more like a man as a kid, or told to stop crying, that real men don't cry, that I shouldn't wear pink or feminine colors, or that I shouldn't be interested in makeup or nail polish or skincare. Typical things that most, if not every mask-presenting person has likely had to face growing up. I think this is something that has taken the longest to unpack. There have been moments in the past when I catch myself feeling maybe uncomfortable when a man or a mask-presenting individual presents more feminine in the moment than maybe I would. And, thinking back on this, it also reminds me of how, kind of related to drag queens, I didn't first understand why men enjoy dressing up in drag at first. I've seen real change in myself over the years, leaning more into my femininity and my masculinity, and not being ashamed of either. And while I do tend to present masculine, dressing in my appearance and such, like, honey, you better believe I love color. I love to find ways to make my outfits coordinate in some way with a color theme. But again, it's not just color or fashion or phrases. I also allow myself to feel my feelings, not being not giving into the don't cry, like, real men don't cry kind of a thing. And that takes so much effort in a world where men are told to sweep it under the rug instead of sitting with your feelings, acknowledging them, and then letting them go. I don't view femininity or masculinity as one being more appealing than the other. And I want to embrace myself in whatever way I feel like showing up that day. The last question for this segment, and it's a bit broad, but what I wanted to talk about is how can we create a more inclusive and diverse understanding of experiences and celebrate that within any community? This is kind of a broad question, and that's on purpose, as I said. While I've touched on a few things related to internalized homophobia surrounding the gay community, going deeper and seeing that internalized perception of masc or femme presenting individuals, straight or queer, I want to take it one level more for this conversation. There is so much internalized fear and misunderstanding around people who have HIV, who may be U equals U, meaning undetectable equals untransmittable, and people who get an STI or sexually transmitted infection. This is both in and out of the queer community. And it's something that, again, if more people took the time, we likely would have more understanding and kindness. I feel that the more people can relate and empathize, the less fear and mistrust we would have. This last segment, I really want to lean in and understand more about HIV and specifically the AIDS epidemic and the lavender scare. If you're not familiar with the AIDS epidemic, I found a summary online and I'll share that briefly. The AIDS epidemic emerged in the early 1980s, initially reported among gay men in the United States. It soon became clear the previous unknown virus, later named HIV, which attacked the immune system, left individuals vulnerable to infections. Fear and confusion gripped the nation, fueled by incomplete understanding and stigma towards the affected queer community. Tragically, the Reagan administration's response was abysmal to say the least. Despite mounting evidence and pleas from activists, decisive action was delayed for years. By the time comprehensive federal initiatives were implemented in the late 1980s, the damage was immense. An estimated 39 million people have died from AIDS-related illness globally, and over 700,000 individual lives have been lost in the US alone. However, the story of AIDS is not simply one of loss. Through tireless activism, research breakthroughs, and improved access to prevention and treatment, the situation has drastically changed. Today, effective antiretroviral medications can suppress the virus, allowing people with HIV to live long and healthy lives. While no cure currently exists, new infections are declining, and the narrative is shifting from fear and death to hope and management. Though while we've seen a decline in infection rates in England, data from 2020 showed that for the first time in a decade, new HIV diagnoses among heterosexual individuals were higher than among gay and bisexual men. Yet challenges still remain. Unequal access to healthcare and persistent stigma continue to impact vulnerable and underserved populations. The fight against HIV is far from over, but the progress made underscores the power of collective action, scientific advancement, and a commitment to human dignity. I'll take a pause there. It's so hard to summarize decades worth of history, but I'm hopeful that that was helpful and insightful. And before I share my thoughts, briefly, I'd also want to read a synopsis I found on the lavender scare, something that was only recently brought to my attention with the latest limited series of Fellow Travelers. If you haven't seen it or haven't heard about it, I definitely recommend it. It's available, I believe, on Paramount Plus. It was on Showtime, but then I think Paramount Plus merged the two. Anyway, here's that brief summary. The Lavender Scare, a dark chapter in American history, unfolded roughly between the late 1940s and the mid-1960s, so years before the AIDS epidemic. Driven by Cold War anxieties about communism and societal fears of homosexuality, the US government launched several unfounded investigations targeting LGBTQ+ individuals, particularly gay men within its ranks. Fueled by Senator Joseph McCarthy's anti-communist crusade, suspicion fell upon anyone deemed a quote-unquote security risk. Homosexuality was conflated with disloyalty and potential blackmail vulnerability, leading to widespread government investigations, interrogations, and dismissals. Thousands lost their jobs, careers, and reputations solely based on their sexual orientation, often without due process or evidence. While no official tally exists, historians believe many LGBTQ+ individuals, especially those publicly outed or facing job loss, may have contemplated or attempted at unaliving themselves due to the shame, isolation, and despair caused by the scare. Despite public outcry and legal challenges, the lavender scare persisted for nearly 2 decades. It wasn't until the Stonewall riots of 1969 that the LGBTQ rights movement began to turn the tide. While never formally acknowledged or ended, the lavender scare's influence gradually waned, leaving behind a legacy of trauma, discrimination, and a long path toward equality for the LGBTQ+ community. All right, let's just sit with those 2 pieces of history for a minute. And, first thinking about the lavender scare, it just completely blew my mind that this was something that I never learned about until now. My heart just absolutely sinks anytime that I think about this period of time and just the way people were treated. It's horrible. I also didn't know about the AIDS epidemic, thinking about that till probably a year or more into realizing I was gay. And even then, I didn't know what HIV was or an STI was. When I was first starting to explore my own sexuality, it just was never talked about. So how could I have known to protect myself or to be aware and, ask questions of sexual partners, just all the things. And even HPV, supposedly you're supposed to get this vaccine when you're in your teens. Thankfully, I was able to get it in my late 20s, and I think the age limit has increased. So if you don't know if you've had your HPV shots or not, definitely ask your provider. When I asked why I hadn't been given those shots as a teenager, I was told, we always believed you'd get married and have sex with one woman. Well, not to get too far off topic, but I strongly feel that sexual education is extremely vital. To me, the AIDS epidemic is something I will continue to reflect on and memorialize because I live in a world and stand on the shoulders of giants who built this world. Regularly, I choose to watch documentaries or films depicting the 1980s to have a glimpse of learning and understanding what it was like for queer people to overcome such insurmountable challenges during that time. Today and every day, I take a pill that helps prevent HIV. Every 3 to 4 months, I go to get blood work done to check for HIV or STIs. And I hate needles, but I'm so incredibly grateful that this exists in a world where only a few decades ago it didn't. I make it my goal, amongst many goals, to be proud of who I am and to never forget the sacrifices my community has made in order for me and countless others to be where we are now. I normally love to wrap up an episode with a quote, and if this is your first time here, that's kind of how things work. If I'm usually doing my own thing by myself, I love to, share a quote to kind of wrap things up. And today, the quote comes from the fabulous Billy Porter and Congressman John Lewis. This is from Porter's memoir, and in this chapter, he's talking to Congressman Lewis at the Oscar Awards. He said, "Congressman Lewis, I know the Oscars may not be the time or place for politics, but I must ask you, for those of us who are feeling activist, resistance fatigue, what would you say to us to encourage forward momentum and engagement?" Congressman Lewis's eyes lit up. He gave me that knowing look, and he clicked right in. We can never give up. We can never give in. We must resist. We must fight for what's right, equality for all. Obviously, Congressman Lewis and Billy Porter, delivered that quote much better than I did in both his audiobook of his memoir and in person at the Oscars. But I hope that in some way that quote was inspiring. I love Congressman Lewis so much and for everything that he's contributed to this world. And Billy Porter, what a legend, absolute legend. So anyway, hope you love that quote as much as I do. And on that note, I just want to say thank you so much for listening to today's episode. It has been an absolute ride exploring each of these topics in this episode. It was also extremely therapeutic for me as I was, considering my opinions on each of these points, something I've been overthinking. So stay tuned for more Queerly Overthinking. You can expect a new episode every other week, so be sure to hit that follow or subscribe button. And it would mean the world to me if you liked what you heard. So please feel free to leave a positive review of the pod or leave a comment on today's social posts. Well, friends, thanks for listening. So excited you're here, so hyped for season 2, and I will see y'all in the next episode. Queerly Overthinking is hosted, edited, and executive produced by Adam Harper, with additional producing by Cass Cooper. You can follow Queerly Overthinking on Instagram or TikTok at Queerly Overthinking, and you can find more at www.queerlyoverthinking.com.